Hello and welcome to the MMA Girl podcast with your host, me, the MMA Girl, Jess. I'd just like to start off by saying WTF. This is the second time I've recorded this episode because, as you guys might have noticed, last week I was absent. I did not record an episode last week. So I left it to this week, and I was hoping obviously to talk about UFC 315 and all that stuff this week. And I recorded my episode yesterday, but everything has changed. So I'm having to re-record this episode a second time. This was not planned, but you know, that's MMA. As you know, MMA is the most unpredictable sport in the whole sports universe. And it just goes to show I might have to just speed up my editing process, because maybe tomorrow there'll be more news that cancels out everything I said in today's episode. So hopefully not. Hopefully Dana's, calmed down. He's cooked. He can go back to the office and stop cooking, because I need some time to breathe. Oh my goodness. So we will go over UFC 315, of course. We'll touch on UFC Des Moines, because I obviously didn't get to touch on that last week. But my goodness, all the announcements that have just come out, I don't know what to say. I think it's any MMA fan's dream to have these fights announced, and we're going to go over them one by one and see what implications they have for both the welterweight and the lightweight divisions. Obviously, we're talking about Ilia Topuria versus Charles do Bronx Oliveira, and of course, the one and only Islam Makhachev is moving up to welterweight to face the newly crowned UFC welterweight champion Jack Della Medellina. And not to mention, middleweights are also getting a shake-up, because of course the highly anticipated fight between Khamzat Chimaev and Dricus du Plessis is finally going to be happening, as we predicted, but it's happening in August and not in July, because in July at UFC 317 International Fight Week we are getting Ilia Topuria versus Charles do Bronx for the vacant UFC lightweight championship belt. Now I don't know what to say, honestly. I'm so happy. It could have gone other ways. When I recorded this episode initially, I was saying, why can't Islam move up to welterweight whilst he keeps his lightweight belt? Because if he's able to, defend his belt in both divisions, as Dana White said last week, he's not against anyone moving up or moving down, but keeping their belts in either division. Islam did tweet out last week saying he would like to be double champ. So unfortunately, that's no longer something that's going to happen for Islam, at least. So maybe Makhachev thought to himself he'd bitten off a bit more than he could chew, and said to himself, why not just move up to welterweight and get that belt as well? I personally just don't see anyone surpassing Islam Makhachev in the history of the UFC for now as one of the most dominant champions that we've ever seen. However, I believe it was on MMA Junkie, Islam Makhachev's manager, he was speaking on why Islam didn't keep the belt at lightweight to move up to welterweight and keep both belts. And there was this question of there not being any kind of interest for the Khabib/Makhachev camp to fight Ilia Topuria, because they mentioned that when Islam beat Volkanovski twice, he was then slandered by people saying he was a 145er, so it's not that big of a deal that you beat Volkanovski. We're talking about one of the most dominant, one of the greatest fighters of all time in Alexander Volkanovski. Yes, he is a featherweight fighter, okay, but that does not mean that Islam beating him is nothing. It just goes to show how fickle people are when it comes to MMA, and I just can't believe that. But obviously now they're taking that into consideration, because they don't want another comment saying, well, if Islam beat Ilia, that's normal because he's a 145er. And I think that if he would have beat Ilia Topuria, which everyone expected him to, that's something that would go down in the history books as one of the greatest victories of his career, because Ilia Topuria is a very dominant champion as well. But for now, we won't be seeing Ilia versus Islam, unless when Islam moves up to welterweight, he loses against Jack Della and then moves back down to lightweight to regain his lightweight championship belt against the winner of Ilia Topuria versus Charles do Bronx. And as Ilia Topuria said on Twitter, I'm sorry, Charles, you are just the roadblock that's blocking me from getting my belt. So you're collateral damage, basically. So he's already predicting he's going to win this fight, of course. Ilia must be confident against Charles do Bronx, because it's been done. Charles has been finished. So why not by Ilia Topuria as well? I think that Charles will give him still a run for his money. But Ilia Topuria is a very dominant champion. Let's not get it mixed up. I think that there are good chances that he wins against Charles Eubanks. No offense to Charles, one of the greatest fighters in lightweight of all times, and one of the biggest, most dominant finishers in the lightweight division. So nothing to take away from Charles, but he's at the back end of his career. He's been champion. Now the newer generation are taking over, which is what I want to say to some UFC fans that often say, the UFC is not like it was, bring back the old days, the UFC is washed. Saying it's washed would be like saying something new is not old enough. You know what I mean? And I feel like the newer generation are bringing other things to the table. The fight game is becoming more modern. There are things that obviously need to be changed over the years. There are things that back in the day we can't do now, and there are things that back in the day we don't do anymore just because things have changed, things have improved. So I think there are some things that we can't say, oh, it was better before, because there are just things we can't get away with anymore and we can't do anymore, and people that are retired. So you have to get used to the newer generation that are coming up in the UFC and in the MMA world in general, and embrace it. The more we embrace the newer generation and the newer world of MMA that is upon us right now, the more we can love what we're seeing on our screens. Anyway, I'm going to go back to 2 weeks ago at UFC Des Moines. UFC Des Moines, if you guys remember, of course, was headlined by Corey Sandhagen versus Davidson Figueiredo. It ended, of course, with a victory for Corey Sandhagen, which may or may not have set the pace for an eventual retirement from Davidson Figueiredo. Of course, I don't wish for him to retire. A leg injury at his age and 38 years old is quite a nasty thing to recover from. So hopefully we'll see Figgy again. If we don't see Figgy again, I would not be surprised. But in the bantamweight division, this makes way for a new title contender in Corey Sandhagen. And as I was saying in my previously recorded podcast, I think that Merab versus Sean O'Malley will finish with Merab retaining his title. Then, of course, Merab will fight Petr Yan, who is next in line. Perhaps a rematch against Umar, but I think they're going to wait for Corey to have his title shot before giving Umar another shot. Of course, after Petr Yan gets a title shot against Merab, who wins that fight, I don't know, but the winner of that fight will then take on Corey Sandhagen, and I think Corey will go quite far with his career. He deserves it. And UFC Des Moines in general was a great pay-per-view. I'm very happy to see Daniel Rodriguez get back in the WID column. I've got a soft spot for Daniel Rodriguez. Daniel Rodriguez was against Santiago Ponzinibbio at UFC Des Moines, and he got a second round TKO in the most beautiful fashion. And of course, happy to see him back in the WID column. So hopefully we'll see him back in another main card. And of course, the talk of the town, RDR, Reina Derrida. Derrida beat a overconfident Bo Nickel, who maybe he didn't cut from 205 pounds down to middleweight, but he did cut quite a few pounds, and that may have been at his detriment because he waited until the last week of his camp to cut way too much weight, and I think that must have been one of the causes why he wasn't up to scratch. But not to take anything away from Derrida, of course, because Derrida is going to be a problem at middleweight. And the UFC have announced just now that Derrida will be facing none other than Robert Whittaker in July in Abu Dhabi. And I'm so excited because Abu Dhabi for Whittaker has been, the whole United Arab Emirates has been quite a tumultuous place where Robert Whittaker has won and lost some insane fights. So I'm excited to see Robert Whittaker back in the cage since he obviously lost against Chimaev, and I'm excited to see what a Robert Whittaker would do against Derrida, albeit Derrida is great on the ground, but Whittaker is amazing on the feet. If you rewatch his fight in Abu Dhabi against Aliskerov, you could tell the few strikes he landed, he went on a striking clinic in that fight, and every strike landed. And I think that's going to be a problem for Derrida. So I'm excited to see that fight, and it's not too far away. Derrida back-to-back fights, Robert Whittaker coming back from his injury. Very happy to see that. The middleweight division is always hot and sizzling, and it still is, and it still will be. For Bo Nickel, of course, who is now 13th, if I'm not mistaken, in the middleweight division. I'm not sure what's next for Bo Nickel, but he has quite a few possibilities, of course, seeing as there is a big division at middleweight, and I think there'll be quite a few people that are willing to fight him. However, once the rider's done with Whittaker, if he finishes or at least beats Whittaker, he has asked for the best American striker in the middleweight division, and that is Sean Strickland. He, of course, called him out. So why not follow up after Whittaker, depending on whether he wins or loses, with a fight against Sean Strickland? I think even if he lost against Whittaker, that would be a great idea to put him against Sean Strickland, who is also coming off a loss. So why not? What did you guys think of UFC Des Moines? I'm asking you to think back 2 weeks again, since obviously there has been quite a few events since then. So did you guys enjoy the card? Were you happy with the results and the overall pay-per-view? Because I know a lot of people were obviously complaining. And people always complain because at UFC 315, despite it being an epic pay-per-view, they of course found a reason to complain about how the card wasn't stacked enough. In terms of star power at UFC 315, I believe that card was quite stacked still, because even on the prelim card, we had the likes of Marc-Andre Barriault versus Bruno Silva, which ended, of course, with Bruno Silva going to the hospital and Marc-Andre Barriault getting back into the win column after an epic first round KO against Bruno Silva. And thank you to Mark, because it was a great way to set up the tone for the rest of the card, even though, of course, there were fights beforehand, but he got the second KO of the night, and a well-deserved victory for him. And there's already a fight that's been announced for Marc-Andre Barriault, who is coming back in Abu Dhabi as well in July against none other than Shara Bullet. Of course, Shara Bullet, as you know, he can only fight in the United Arab Emirates because he's got one eye, and the most of the athletic commissions in other countries don't allow people to have fights when they're blind in one eye, except for the United Arab Emirates. So he'll be fighting in Abu Dhabi, as he usually does. And Marc-Andre Barriault has been signed straight away up for a fight in Abu Dhabi. So he is, just like the rider from last week, having a real quick turnover. And that is just crazy to me. And I'm so happy for him, because he was obviously in the losing column. Both Bruno Silva and Marc-Andre Barriault were in the losing column. They lost at least 3 fights in a row each. So push comes to shove, one of them was going to get out of the losing column. But in the way that Marc-Andre Barriault, in front of his home crowd, did, I couldn't have been happier for him. Other prelim fights to note that were quite important were, of course, the fight between Navajo Sterling and Ivan Erslan. I put on my TikTok, if you guys follow me on TikTok, the link's down below, a list of the prelim fights that I considered really important to watch out for. And even though Navajo's fight ended in a decision, he almost finished his opponent at the end. I feel like he's still got a few improvements to make in terms of his explosivity and his dominance in a fight, because he was clearly the better man on Saturday night, but he wasn't able to show that until the later stages of the fight. So a very nice fight, and he got a good knockdown in the third round, and he's the only one of the two that were able to knock down his opponent. So good job to Navajo Sterling. I think he's got a great future ahead of him. I just think his confidence needs to improve, but that's something I think that will come along throughout his career. He's from CKB, which is obviously the New Zealand gym where Israel Adesanya and Dan Hooker train, notably, and also Kevin Jousset, who just left the UFC. So this is someone that you need to keep an eye on, I think. I was, of course, looking out for Jessica Andrade because we share a name. And I like Jessica Andrade. She's been around for a while. But unfortunately for her, Jessica Dovicius was able to get the victory via submission in the first round. I mean, it's sad to see that Jessica is again in the losing column, where she shouldn't be there. She doesn't belong in the losing column. But I think that she's having a hard time of it right now. I'm not sure what's going on, but she's getting dominated at the moment. So it was really sad to see her lose again. But hopefully next time we see Jessica, she'll be in the winning column. Hopefully. We cross our fingers. Last fight from the prelim card that I wanted to know, which of course was the last fight from the prelim card, was Mike Malott versus Charles Ratch, which of course finished in a second round KO for Mike Malott, who also won in front of his home crowd. He's scary. He looks really dangerous. So we've not seen him too often, but I think we'll see him again very soon, because he's not someone to sleep on, honestly. I think he looks really good. He looked good on Saturday night, and I'm excited to see what's next for him. Now, the main card. There's a lot of things to say about the main card, but I'm going to start off with BSD because, of course, as I missed recording last week's episode, I would have talked about the fact that BSD's opponent, Joel Alvarez, didn't make it to Montreal because he injured his hand, so he had to pull out of the fight. And following the announcement that he had to pull out. As usual, when a fight is cancelled or in jeopardy, you get all the vultures coming out on Twitter saying, I'll fight you, I'm ready, I'm in Montreal, I'm in Canada, I can come, I've done a full camp. So this is no exception in this case. BSD, of course, coming off of 2 losses, one obviously Dustin Poirier via KO and one via doctor stoppage by Renato Moicano at UFC Paris. He needed to get back into win column anyways. So I think that those of whom proposed a fight against him, notably Rebecca and Gamrot, were too much of a threat to Benoit for potentially not getting back into the win column, because he needed to get back into the win column, because I think a 3rd consecutive loss might have put in jeopardy his chances of re-signing a contract with the UFC. Or just in general for his career, he has a record currently after his fight on Saturday of 14 fights won and 3 losses. So I don't think he wanted to lose another fight. So I get it. When you have big names like Gamrot and Rebecca calling you out and saying, I'm ready, accept a contract against me, I'm ready to replace Joe Alvarez, and the UFC offer you a fight against Gamrot for UFC 315, and you want to fight in Montreal because you speak French and it's a French speaking city, and you want to be in front of that crowd, but you don't want one or two of the opponents that proposed to you. It's really disappointing to be hearing all the abuse that's being thrown at BSD and all the French fighters in general, because the French fighters get a lot of abuse and a lot of insults in the MMA world. And sometimes when I see situations like this, I'm like, well, yeah, I get it. Don't back out of a fight, Benoit, even though you're scared to lose again. Just, accept a fight when one's proposed to you. Of course, they obviously found a solution because they called back Propelek, who has not fought at the UFC since 2019, who was supposed to fight on the regional circuit in Canada on the Friday night, but of course had to cancel his bout against his scheduled opponent to fight Benoit Saint-Denis on the Saturday night. I completely understand why Propelek said yes, but the problem with that is that he was not ready for Benoit Saint-Denis. As we saw, Propelek lost in the second round against Benoit via submission. As some of you know, Benoit has never won a fight via decision. He has always won via finish, either submission or KO. He's more skilled in the submissions area, but I can't wait to see Benoit, as he's in the lightweight division, face a Paddy Pimblett, face a Charles Oliveira, face some real grapplers that are really, really dangerous, because I'd like to see how his grappling meets a real grappler that's known for his submissions like Charles Oliveira and that's known for their dominance on the ground like Paddy Pimblett. So that's kind of a question I have in my head. Is he as dominant on the ground as we think he is? As you know, recently he has changed coaches. He left one of his coaches to join the coaching staff that Nassourdine Imavov has on his team. And the coaching staff for Nassourdine Imavov, they focus more on building up a fight, not going in all guns blazing and potentially getting clipped because you're not paying attention to what your opponent's doing because you're going in too dominantly. And you could tell Benoit had applied this to his fight game on Saturday night, because he didn't go in as crazy and as forward as he usually does. He waited out, went into the clinch, got a few takedowns. Propelek, props to you, because you didn't get submitted in the first, but got submitted in the second, of course, when the fatigue started to wear in. And that's when Benoit said, in the second round, I started to take over a bit more and dominate the fight even more and get the finish. So it's a nice strategy. I give him that. It's a nice strategy. I just think that, future reference, Benoit, if you have an opponent that's cancelled, try and accept the opponents that proposed to you, because I would have loved to see a Gamrot versus Benoit Saint-Denis at the last minute. That would have been nice for the fans, and that would have been a great replacement for Joel Alvarez, because Joel Alvarez would not have been an easy opponent for Benoit Saint-Denis, and everyone was excited for that fight. And so the fact that it didn't happen was just so disappointing. But anyway, he got the win. That's what matters. And he said on the mic after the fight that he is not scared to face Gamrot and would be prepared even to face him in a couple of weeks if need be. So we'll stay tuned, because as we saw on Saturday night, Marc-Andre Barrio, he won, and he's already signed a contract to fight in Abu Dhabi in 2 months. So maybe Benoit could be also fighting in a couple of months, or maybe he'll wait it out until September, because he did say it would be a pleasure to fight again in Paris as he did last year. Probably not main eventing it, but he'll probably co-main it this time. Because as you know, I go to UFC Paris every year. I would love to see Cyril Gane back in the octagon in the main event. So we'll see what happens next. Anyway, next up on the main card, we had, of course, Alexa Grasso versus Natalia Silva. I thought Alexa would get the win here, but she seemed a little bit shy in the octagon. Of course, this went to a decision, so 3 rounds of Alexa basically getting dominated, but she was able, obviously, to respond to all the striking from Natalia Silva in the first round. She seemed very responsive. Whenever Natalia Silva was striking her, she was able to respond, but Natalia Silva was taking over and getting more and more dominant. So luckily for Alexa, she didn't get clipped and finished, but unfortunately she didn't get the win. And it's a shame to see a former champion lose again. But I think this is just the start of something for Natalia Silva. And Natalia Silva, I think, is going to be a real danger in the women's flyweight division. And she was watching on the sidelines after her victory whilst Manon Fioro and Shevchenko were fighting. And when Shevchenko's arm was raised, she was applauding Shevchenko. But of course, in the corner of her eyes, you could tell she was saying to herself, that's my next opponent, or my future opponent, or at least she has what I want, and that's the belt. So I think that's, all power to her. Natalia Silva has what it takes, I think, one day to get the belt. So we'll see what happens next for her. And I hope, obviously, next up, Alexa Grasso, when she next fights, she will get a win. Now, going on to the third fight of the evening, of course, the featherweight bout that ended Jose Aldo's career. Zahabi was very dominant throughout the fight, but Jose Aldo, maybe he became dominant too late, towards the later stages of the fight. Of course, we saw more dominance from Jose Aldo than from Zahabi, but that wasn't enough overall to win the fight for Jose. Jose was expecting to win that fight. You all saw it. He was obviously waiting for his hand to be raised and was so disappointed to see that he wasn't winning. Now, he took to Twitter and Instagram after the fight to take away a bit of this judgment from the judging, because, of course, there were a few fights on Saturday night where the judges may or may not have scored it as other judges would have done, and a few questionable judgments on their behalf. But Jose Aldo did not take anything away from the judges and said that he knows now that he's no longer in this. His heart is no longer in the fight game. And you could tell. I mean, the start of the fight, they started off very much explosive. Jose Aldo was getting some nice striking in there, but just Zahabi was able to get those jabs in. And of course, Jose Aldo knocked him down towards the end of the fight, but that wasn't enough to surpass Zahabi's domination in this fight, because he got more significant strikes landed to Jose Aldo's significant strikes. Very sad to see, because I think there was a really close fight, and I think it should have been a split decision, honestly. But we're no judges, and the judges on the night were the judges that decided who won and who lost. So either way, the decision is made. So Jose Aldo, once again, he's the GOAT. He's GOATed already. He has nothing else to prove. He's done everything he wanted to do in this industry, and he can only be proud of what he's achieved in the UFC and in MMA in general. And I think he's right to walk away now, because the longer you stay on, the more you can ruin your legacy by losing without saying stop. I need to leave. But I think if I was a fighter in their position, I would have, of course, as any fighter might say to themselves, I want to win my last fight. I don't want to lose on my last appearance in the octagon, which is, of course, natural for any fighter to go out like Khabib did, like Georges St-Pierre did, like Amanda Nunes did, even though she's maybe coming back. These are people that retired with belts, with legacies that never ended on a low note. So of course he wanted to end on a high note. Maybe he planned on, whether winning or losing on Saturday, he planned maybe on retiring anyway. But a lot of people were saying it was the bad judge scorecards that pushed Jose Aldo to retire. I think he may have already been contemplating retiring before the fight, because of course, if you guys remember, he was supposed to fight a bantamweight against Zahabi. They're both bantamweight fighters initially, but unfortunately he didn't make weight, so they had to fight at featherweight. So maybe that, combined with the mindset that's just not in the right place, he said to himself, either way, even if I win this fight, I'm gonna end it on that note. So thank you so much, Jose Aldo. You'll always be remembered. You're a legend, and you're one of the GOATed fighters of this industry in general. So I have nothing else to say on that point. Did you think the judges badly scored that scorecard, or do you think that it was a well-deserved win for Zahabi, who had, of course, Georges St-Pierre in his corner, and he was on home soil? What did you guys think of that? Next up, of course, we have Valentina Shevchenko versus Manon Fioro. It went the distance, as most people would have predicted. This was a tight neck-and-neck bout. Honestly, Manon Fioro, who has a karate background, got quite a few leg kicks in there. In terms of statistics, she got more leg kicks than Valentina did, but Valentina landed more significant strikes than Manon did. And of course, for the takedown attempts, Valentina attempted 9 takedowns and achieved 2 of which she had attempted. And Manon, whilst she attempted more takedowns with 12, only got 1 takedown. So with the total significant strikes being neck and neck practically, the takedowns were the difference for Valentina Shevchenko, and she just appeared overall more dominant over Manon Fioro, who was, of course, the bigger, the taller fighter with the longer legs. So it just goes to show, small and mighty, as Mighty Mouse would say, small and mighty does not mean you'll lose the fight. Valentina Shevchenko being the only fighter, male and female combined, to achieve all 8 rubies on her belt, which is insane. I mean, she's a goat in her own right. And now people are saying, of course, what's next for Valentina Shevchenko? And I think that there are rumors that Weili Zhang was interested in a fight against Valentina. And I think that would be great to see both the strawweight and the flyweight champion neck and neck in a bout for what I think will be Valentina's belt, unless she wants to move down to strawweight, which I don't think she'll be doing. So next up for Valentina Shevchenko is potentially a super fight against Weili Zhang, of course, who is currently the women's strawweight UFC champion. And now for the last fight of the evening, the fight that got everyone's brains completely bamboozled, and the fight that actually determined a lot of things for the lightweight and the welterweight division: Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Medellina. Clash of the Titans here. Belal Muhammad, of course, was a champion at the time. Jack Della was the 7th ranked UFC welterweight contender. So seeing as he, of course, won via unanimous decision, this is huge. He went from 7th to champion just because Shavkat couldn't fight Belal Muhammad, and Jack, who was initially supposed to fight Leon Edwards, was scheduled then to fight Belal Muhammad, which is insane to me. How luck has it that he was able to get that title shot and actually win. What a dominant victory over Belal. Of course, Belal did not decide to grapple in this fight. I think he took Jack down a total of 3 times out of the 9 times he attempted, and Jack tried to take Belal down 3 times and did not achieve any takedowns at all, which is not surprising, of course, because Belal is the stronger person on the ground. But on the feet, Jack Della Medellina, he is insane. There is no doubt about it that Jack Della was dominating Belal from start to finish on the feet, which is why there were certain occasions where Belal tried to get in to the clinch and breathe and just, rest up a little bit. But of course, that wasn't enough. Jack Della just kept on, didn't get tired, and he looked very dangerous. I think that now that he's champion, of course, he is the biggest threat in the welterweight division, but he is his own biggest threat because he is currently the champion. So he has now got a target on his back, and that target has been bullseyed by none other than Islam Makhachev, because of course Islam Makhachev was supposed to fight the winner of this fight if it was Jack Della, because he wasn't willing to fight Belal Muhammad. But if he wasn't willing to fight Belal Muhammad and Belal won, he would have stayed at lightweight to fight Ilia Topuria. So a lot of fans wanted Belal to win because they didn't want to see Islam versus Jack. They wanted to see Islam versus Ilia. But in any case, we're going to see Islam Makhachev versus Jack Della Medellina. That's going to be a striking clinic. That's going to be a huge job for Jack Della Medellina to not get taken down and submitted by Islam Makhachev. And as Jack Della Medellina said on Ariel Helwani's show, he said, I'm going to destroy him. He's going to try and take me down. I'm going to keep it on the feet. He's very long. He's got long legs. He's going to be an awkward fighter for Islam Makhachev, who is smaller than Jack Della. He will be smaller in height, and that will work at Jack's advantage to get those strikes in and potentially do a clinic on Islam Makhachev. The odds are in, and the odds are saying it's a pick-me. Jack or Islam could win, which means that Jack has just as much chances to win as Islam has to win as well, which is just insane because Islam's not been a pick-me favourite since I don't even know how many years. So that is huge. That is huge, guys. What do you guys think of that fight? Are you happy that Islam versus Jack is going to happen? Were you hoping to see Islam versus Ilya rather than Islam versus Jack? And do you think Islam has what it takes to beat Jack Della Medellina? Now we're going to be moving on to the implications that UFC 315 has had on the MMA space as a whole. And of course, go into the latest news that I've gathered over the last 2 weeks. If we summarize the implications of UFC 315, we can conclude that seeing as Makhachev is moving up to welterweight and he'll be facing Jack Della, we're going to be getting Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira, which is a fact, of course, that has been announced by Dana White. Now, this means, of course, that seeing as Islam sees no need to face Ilia Topuria, which is why he vacated his belt rather than kept it, this opens up the lightweight division much more than it would have done if he'd have kept both belts. And for the welterweight division, of course, as we were saying earlier on, if, for example, Jack Della Medellina is able to defeat Islam Makhachev, Islam will be going back down to lightweight potentially, or he may stay in welterweight and try and make his way back up to fight the champion. But most likely he'll step back down to lightweight and face the champion at that time, and maybe he'll be facing Charles Oliveira for the second time, or potentially facing Ilia Topuria. I think it's fair to say that Ilia Topuria will be a undoubtedly harder challenge for Makhachev than Charles de Bronx, because he's already beat Charles. But we never know what can happen, and maybe he'll beat Jack Della Medellina to become double champ in 2 divisions. Who knows? But anyway, that's the fight that's been announced, thanks to the win that Jack Della Medellina brought home to Australia. And of course, now we have 2 Australian champions in Volkanovski in the featherweight division, and of course, Jack Della in the welterweight division, which has given the idea to Mr. Robert Whittaker that he would like to sail off into the sunset, having gotten back the middleweight title as well, which unfortunately, the current middleweight situation is a little bit difficult right now. He has lost to the current champion, Dricus du Plessis, and to the current number one contender, Khamzat Chimaev. So making his way back up would be difficult, but I think that Whittaker should wait it out. And we'll see how he does facing Mr. RDR, the rider. And if he wins against the rider, potentially a matchup against Israel Adesanya to finish their trilogy, or potentially another fight against Dricus du Plessis. Maybe. In any case, I'd love to see as much success as possible for Whittaker to get that title back, 2-time middleweight champion, and have 3 Australian champions at one time. And I think that's what Whittaker was hinting at, that if he was able to get the belt back, he would then sail off into the sunset and retire with the belt around his waist. That would be amazing to see. But there's a lot of moving parts again before that kind of situation can happen. So I'm just excited to see in August Dricus versus Khamzat, because this is a fight that has been months and months in the making, maybe a year in the making, more than that even. And we're going to see if Dricus du Plessis is able to slay the beast in Khamzat Chimaev and finally give him his first loss, because this man has not ever lost a fight. So we'll be seeing what Dricus du Plessis is able to do against Chimaev. And Dricus du Plessis, we should not sleep on him. He has skills for days. And he is someone who, honestly, throughout the whole middleweight division, I think is the one that can give Khamzat a run for his money more than any other fighter. And I'm just so excited to see how these 2 intriguing, different fighting styles clash in the octagon in August of this year. So we're getting what we wanted, guys. Another fight that was announced, of course, Pantoja will also be defending his belt at UFC 317, the same night that Ilia Topuria and Charles Oliveira are going to be fighting for the UFC lightweight belt. So we're going to be having 2 championship fights at UFC 317 in July at International Fight Week, and Pantoja will be taking on Kai Kara France, who could be also bringing home the belt to Australia and New Zealand, because he's from New Zealand, of course. So I love Kai Kara France. I love his fighting style. This is going to be a really interesting fight. I would be happy if either guys won. I think they're both very much deserving. Pantoja's a legend. He's been reigning over the flyweight division for so long. And Kai Kara France, he deserves his title shot. So he is a well-deserved contender right now. So I can't wait to see that. And I can't wait for July. Only 2 months away, we're going to be seeing 2 huge championship fights. And summer is just going to be insane. So I couldn't wait for all that. I'm going to go over the fights that have been announced that struck me the most. A fight that I just saw get announced was Taliesin Texera versus the one and only Derek Lewis. And now Taliesin Texera, when he last fought, he of course obliterated his opponent. Taliesin Texera is currently undefeated, and when he won, I did say personally I would like to see him against a top ranked heavyweight opponent. So they're going to be facing one another in a 5-round main event in June. And of course, the return of the Black Beast, Derek Lewis. We're going to see how Taliesin Texera fares against someone who is highly ranked in the heavyweight division. And I'm so excited. That's going to be really explosive. Other fights that have been announced are Vettori versus Brendan Allen, which is happening on the 18th of July at New Orleans for UFC 318, where we're going to be obviously seeing the enigmatic, charismatic Dustin Poirier, the Diamond, have his last dance against Max Holloway for the BMF belt. So Vettori versus Allen, I don't know if it's the co-main yet. Vettori versus Allen, it was the fight to make. Both guys in the losing column, both guys need a win. I can't wait to see what's going to happen between them guys. And a fight has been added to the UFC Atlanta card, featuring, of course, the main event, Joaquin Buckley versus Usman. And the fight that's been announced is Cody Garbrandt versus Rueni Barcelos, and that's happening on the 14th of June. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're having in July a Abu Dhabi card with Derida versus Whittaker and the Bullet, Shah Bullet versus Marc-Andre Barrios. So some exciting fights are happening right now. Let's go into a few things that have been happening outside the UFC before we end this podcast. PFL Paris was supposed to happen last week. It was unfortunately cancelled. No explanation as to why. We were supposed to be seeing Patrice Evra make his debut as an amateur fighter for PFL. So that didn't happen, of course. And we were supposed to see newly signed Taylor Lapalus, who has just left the UFC, who signed for the PFL and was going to make his PFL debut at PFL's PFL Paris, which is going to be happening in the same arena where UFC Paris happens every year. So no news on when that's going to be rescheduled, but they said it's going to be rescheduled. But for now, it's been cancelled. Other news on the PFL front, we saw Paul Hughes facing Bruno Miranda at PFL's PFL Europe event on the 10th of May, and he got the left hook to ground strikes to win that fight in the first round, just under 43 seconds. Now, this has big implications as well in the Khabib camp, because of course he took to the mic just after his win and called out his former opponent Usman Nurmagomedov, who beat him via decision in January. Now, this could obviously become a trilogy if anyone wants it, but I would love a trilogy between these guys. But just a rematch for Paul Hughes already is definitely on the cards, and I think Usman will be ready whenever he wants to rematch against Paul Hughes, who of course thinks he has a chance against Usman, and I completely understand, because he didn't get finished by Usman at all. So this time around, hopefully there will be a finish between either of the guys. So that's what's happening on the PFL front. If there are any Ryan Bader fans in my audience, then you'll be pleased to know, or pleased to have heard, that he has signed to Ryzen. So most people, when Bellator had to close their doors, thought that Ryan Bader was going to move to PFL, as most people did, or maybe, just maybe, re-sign with the UFC, which is what I thought most likely would have happened. But he has signed for none other than, of course, Ryzen in Japan. So if you want to see Ryan Bader fight in the heavyweight division, now you have to tune in to Ryzen, and you'll be seeing Ryan Bader make his debut. No word on the date for his debut yet, but I cannot wait to see what he will be doing in a Ryzen octagon and how that will be for him. Can't wait for that. In other news, for those who enjoyed the first Roadhouse film with Conor McGregor and Jake Gyllenhaal, you'll be pleased to know that the second Roadhouse has, of course, been approved with the huge success of the first one. And it's crazy to me how originally the first film was expected to come out in cinemas, but Jeff Bezos at Amazon didn't want to release Roadhouse in the cinemas because he potentially didn't think it would do very well, and it was a huge box office success. So I think maybe for the second film he'll be willing to put out in cinemas, maybe for a limited time. In any case, the new Roadhouse film is in post-production, of course, for Roadhouse 2, and we've just had word that the director for Roadhouse 2 is going to be none other than Guy Ritchie. So I think that they've seen the success, of course, for the first Roadhouse film. It went well with Jake Gyllenhaal and Conor McGregor in this Roadhouse remake, and they probably said to themselves, we need to bring in someone who is adept and used to directing gritty, fighting-based films. And of course, you think of Guy Ritchie first and foremost, because if you think back to some of his films and some of his series, a lot of the time that comes back to combat sports and especially boxing. So this is just another one of those films that Guy Ritchie will just absolutely ace, in my opinion. And I cannot wait to see in a couple of years, probably, because if we're talking about now and it's not even been started yet, I think we'll get this film in a couple of years. But now it's been announced that Guy Ritchie is the director for the second version of Roadhouse, the remake. So I'm happy to see that, and I can't wait to see it. There are a few bits and bobs. Tom Aspinall, Jon Jones, and Dana White, he touched on it on his live, and he said, don't worry, I'm going to be announcing that soon, which probably means that it's been concluded. I don't know if that means that we're seeing Tom Aspinall versus Jon Jones, but in any case, apparently he's going to be fixing the heavyweight situation, the heavyweight division situation, because recently Curtis Blades came out, Curtis Blades being a huge contender in the heavyweight division. He said that for him, Jon Jones should have been stripped a long time ago and should still be stripped if he's not willing to fight, because now we're seeing Jon Jones do anything but fighting. He's going to be participating as a coach on the Ultimate Fighter Russia alongside Nate Diaz, and unfortunately that means that he's going to be, in terms of schedules, not very available. So I don't know if this means anything for us fans who want to see Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones, or if this means that Jon Jones, Tom Aspinall will be next year. But I hope that we're getting some news on that front. And if Jon Jones is stripped, then so be it, because he deserves to be stripped at this point. I cannot wait to see Tom Aspinall in an octagon again. And I currently don't really mind if it's not against Jon Jones right now. I just want to see him unify his belt now. So if he's stripped, he's stripped. And as Tom Aspinall said, he doesn't mind. If he gets to retire Jon Jones before even fighting in, then so be it. On the subject of Jon Jones, of course, Jon posted a little hinty photo on Instagram last week, showing his full wall of UFC pay-per-view posters that he has headlined, and he said there's a spot for a last one. He did say, however, that his poster for Stipe versus Jon Jones wasn't up yet, so the last spot is potentially for that poster. But he was obviously hinting at the fact that we're waiting patiently to have this fight against Tom Aspinall. So that was just another provocative way of saying, I know you guys are waiting for that fight. He did a live yesterday, I think, and he said, everyone's saying in the comments that I'm ducking Tom. It is what it is, but he's teasing us as well. So stop teasing, Jon. If you don't want us to talk about Tom Aspinall, then talk about other things, please. I want to talk about Daniel Cormier, because he was supposed to do the Ultimate Fighter Russia with Jon Jones, but he ultimately refused because he said, I could not do a whole television show face to face with Jon Jones over a few months. It's just not possible for me. He just could not stand Jon Jones for more than 5 minutes. So I think for him, being face to face for UFC's The Ultimate Fighter Russia just would not be sustainable at all. But I don't know if you remember last week, Alex Pereira tweeted out that he was very unhappy with the way the UFC were treating him currently, and this raised questions because a lot of people were saying to themselves, how is that possible? Alex Pereira has been the most active fighter and champion that we've had since Israel Adesanya. How are you saying that you're being mistreated? How is that possible? And apparently, according to Daniel Cormier, because this tweet was eventually deleted and Alex came onto his Instagram saying, I was hacked. According to Daniel Cormier, he was not hacked, and that basically Hunter Campbell went down to Dagestan in order to do some negotiations with Islam Makhachev regarding his future fights. And whilst he was in Dagestan, he benefited from the fact that he was down there to go and see Ankalaev, Uncle Ank, who is currently, of course, the UFC's light heavyweight champion. And he offered Ankalaev to fight at UFC 317 before, of course, the 317 card was announced. He offered a fight against Alex Pereira for, of course, the rematch at UFC 317. And Ankalaev, of course, obliged immediately. However, when he called Alex Pereira to offer him a fight in July, Alex said that would be too soon for him. He's not ready. So Hunter Campbell, of course, said, well, then in that case, you wouldn't mind if I gave the title shot to someone else whilst we were waiting for you. And of course, that infuriated Alex Pereira. So that's just according to Daniel Cormier. That's not facts. But I do see that kind of happening, because now that we're hearing that UFC's 317 card is booked and it's Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira in the main event, I think they kind of were obliged to wait for Alex Pereira. They're going to probably put Alex Pereira in a fight against Ankalaev more towards September, October, I think, because now that all the main events have been announced until September, I don't see him fighting until at least September, October. So they've preferred going with Alex Pereira than Ankalaev in terms of when they're available. But I think that they owe him that much to Alex Pereira for all the times he has filled in last minute for any fights, which is why people were kind of surprised that he wasn't quick to say yes to a rematch against Ankalaev, considering he's the one who's always said yes to last minute fights. But he may just want more time. We can't forget that Alex Pereira is 37 years old. He needs some more time to recover than potentially beforehand. And as did Izzy Adesanya, going to every 2 or 3 months fighting these huge fights, it takes a toll out of your body, and you can't sustain that rhythm all the time. So even though Alex has accepted a lot of last minute fights, has been one of the most active fighters in the UFC roster for the last year or so, he needs a break. So I completely understand. He lost his belt this year. He doesn't want to lose a second time, so he wants to take his time to really prepare himself for the Ankalaev that we're going to be seeing the next time he'll be in the octagon against Alex Pereira. So that is completely understandable. But if DC is correct, then Alex Pereira, of course, was obliged to delete the tweet that he tweeted out, and the UFC met with him surely to put things back in place and put things back in order, because we don't want to see any big names like Alex Pereira complaining that UFC aren't treating him correctly, because that's just completely not what they should be doing, and they know that. So anyway, that is all I have for you guys. That is all the latest news. UFC 315 breakdown, UFC 317, UFC 318, UFC 319. Everything is insane right now, and we've gone over, I think, everything that I've just thought of to go over. If I've forgotten anything, don't forget to comment in the comment section below. What do you guys think of the fights that have been announced? What do you guys think of UFC 315? Are you excited for Islam versus Jack Della, or were you hoping to see Islam versus Ilya? In any case, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I will see you guys next week for UFC Fight Night, Morales versus Burns. See you guys later. Bye.